Hello again, and welcome to the Plinqit webinar, Have Americans Lost the Desire or Ability to Save? The webinar will start here in just a minute. Attendees are muted, but we will take questions for a Q&A at the end. Please submit your questions via the Q&A button located at the bottom center of your screen. Your 2024 State of Savings report from Plinqit, along with today's slides and the recording, will be shared within 24 hours of the webinar end. Thank you so much for attending. And now please welcome Kirsten Longnecker, Chief Marketing Officer for Plinqit.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you all for joining. We are really excited to share this research and its implications for your business planning. I'm Kirsten Longnecker, CMO for Plinqit. It's been my honor to work with both of our co-hosts for several years. Please welcome Christina Lojek. Christina is a research manager on the Harris On Demand Omnibus team at the Harris Poll. It's one of the longest running surveys measuring public opinion in the US. With a depth and breadth of experience in quantitative research, Christina designs, executes, and analyzes surveys tailored for public release to meet diverse client objectives. Welcome, Christina.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me today.
And now let me introduce Mallory Griffin, Vice President for York Public Relations. Mallory is an experienced B2B content marketing and public relations strategist with a background in technology, specifically fintech. She oversees client relationships and provides strategic counsel while managing one of York PR's growing teams. Thank you for joining us, Mallory.
Yeah, happy to be here, Kirsten. I'm excited to share the survey results with you all.
Right on. So, Mallory, can you set the stage for us? Like, what did we set out to learn?
Yeah, totally. So just to give a bit of context, back in 2022, our team worked with Plinqit and the Harris Poll to run a survey that would give us insights into the savings habits of Americans. And our goal with that survey was to give bank and credit union leaders a glimpse into the savings priorities of Americans across demographics. So that's a bit of background info. And you got to keep in mind that 2022 was a different economic environment than what we're in today. We were barely coming out of the pandemic. Most events were still virtual. Masks were still common. And inflation was something that Americans were just starting to grapple with, and interest rates had just started their upward ascent. And so a timeline will give us a sense of, how that economic climate shifted over the last few years. So in 2020, you guys will probably remember that the Fed lowered rates in response to the pandemic, and lots of Americans received stimulus checks, which bolstered their savings for a lot of people as lockdowns continued. So they couldn't spend their money. They just kind of kept it in their savings accounts in many cases. And then in 2022, lockdowns eased, but that's when inflation really surges. And then in the battle to fight it, the Fed raises rates 7 times in that year. So then, understandably, this impacts the finances of everyday Americans. And in that survey we did in 2022, which was conducted July 21st to 25th of 2022, we asked over 2,000 Americans what they were saving for that year, and respondents could essentially pick from a variety of savings categories. And we found that most Americans have multiple savings goals, such as saving for a long-term emergency fund or retirement, or putting aside money to pay down debt. And depending on a consumer's age, income level, and a lot of other kind of demographic points, their savings priorities will vary. So we found that the results from that 2022 survey were really telling, and just given the cyclical nature of the economy and then the rapid rise of interest rates over these last couple of years, we definitely knew we wanted to conduct future surveys. And that's why we're excited to share our latest survey data with you all today. Let's see. Changes in the economy. So, sorry, just to kind of bring us to today's survey data. So that was the 2022 survey. And then we obviously did this most recent survey also in July, but of 2024. So now let's look at the economic climate through a little bit more of a recent lens. So the economy continues to grapple with inflation. Interest rates have remained high since the Fed's first rate hike back in March of 2022. So then in 2023 alone, the Fed raised rates 4 more times. So that brings the total number of interest rate hikes since March of 2022 to 11 total hikes. And according to the Fed in March of 2022, the average annual percentage rate or APR for a credit card in the US was 16.34%. But then by January of this year, that average had increased to 20.74%, which is almost 4.5 points higher. And then you get to July of 2024, and the average credit card interest rate is 24.72% APR. So as a result, borrowing has become a lot more expensive and debt has become more expensive, more difficult to manage. And then in addition to these interest rate hikes, COVID-19 also shifted the way that consumers spend money. And a lot of Americans have treated the years following the pandemic as kind of a spending spree. And that is also could be contributing to lower savings rates. So, the lower savings rates, the personal saving rate fell to 3.6% in February. And this is according to analysis from Wells Fargo economists. So people are spending more on things like travel and events, and maybe less so contributing to their personal, savings fund. Because this is the lowest level in more than a year. It's actually the lowest level seen in the decade before 2022. So we've reached historic lows there. And still, despite all of this, despite the inflation and the lower personal savings rates, we're finding that Americans still have a strong desire to save money. And that's what our survey report this year showed. And that's what we're going to dig into today, as well as what their savings priorities are. So I will hand it off to Christina to kind of dive into the data points today.
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to say thank you so much, Mallory, for giving that historical look back. That provides a lot of context for some of the changes that we saw. So, Christina, what has changed since our state of savings in 2022?
Yeah, for starters, half of Americans say their personal finances have gotten worse since the pandemic, and that's according to a bank rate survey published in the fall of last year. And as Mallory mentioned, personal savings rates fell to 3.6%, which is down from 5.3% last year. The good news is that we saw almost no change in the number of Americans that say they're saving for something now compared to 2 years ago, with a healthy 90% of Americans saving for something this year. However, the number of people who say they're saving for an emergency fund is down by more than 16%. And short-term emergency savings saw the biggest decrease, but long-term emergency fund savings is right behind it. When we're looking at the top priorities from 2022 compared to this year, there's similar proportions of Americans saying they're saving for travel and for debt payoff. Other categories that we saw meaningful dips in from 2022 include retirement savings, new vehicle savings, purchasing a home, and education. Kirsten or Mallory, did you have any thoughts on those significant decreases in those savings categories?
Mallory, you're muted.
Sorry, I knew that would happen. I was counting down till it did, but yeah, honestly, the decrease in the savings category for purchasing a home, that made sense to me, since home prices are up. I think they're up about 47% since 2020, according to NPR. And then not only that, median home sales prices last year were about 5 times the median household income. And that's according to Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. So I think Americans, some of them feel a little bit priced out of the housing market right now. So that wasn't too surprising to me.
Yeah, and I was wondering whether the drop in education savings is related to, the student debt forgiveness programs. It does surprise me. The same number of people say they're saving, and yet they have clearly shifted priorities. It makes me more aware of the kind of diversification of where people are banking and saving their money. And it feels like that provides an opportunity for financial institutions to step in with education and relationship to shore up those savings categories. So, Christina, what were the significant insights from 2024 when it comes to savings?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, 90% of Americans are saving for something this year. And the top priorities that we saw for the categories this year would be travel, paying down or off debt, and emergency funds. So not only did a savings for emergency funds drop from the previous report, but travel eclipsed it. Kirsten or Mallory, did that surprise you at all?
Go ahead, Mallory.
Yeah, so personally, not for me. I think a lot of this goes with the data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the data that talked about how consumers are spending more on trips and events, especially now that large scale events have returned in full force. I think a lot more people are kind of ready to get out there and experience things and spend money. And plus, my generation, millennials, we're really known for being willing to spend money on experiences more so than like material goods. So wasn't too surprising to me, honestly.
I like experiences also. We are not in the same generation. And maybe it's summer that's making me feel this way, but I feel like anecdotally, we're witnessing a higher prioritization of travel than any time post-pandemic. But when I look at like marketing and advertising, it feels heavily invested in travel campaigns.
Yeah, both of you guys make great points on that. Two other categories that we saw notable decreases include retirement and saving to purchase a vehicle. We saw less than a third of Americans say that they're saving for retirement this year, which is a decrease of 11.4% since 2022. And only about 1 in 4 Americans are saving to purchase a vehicle this year, a decrease of 16.1% since 2022.
So now can you speak to some of the differences in savings by generation? We alluded to this, but maybe you can bring it to light.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about priorities at different stages in life, some of the data feel fitting to that generation. Gen Z, which is the youngest generation in our study, prioritizes travel nearly as much as they do debt pay down, but they're still on par with their older counterparts when it comes for the savings goal. Boomers are the least likely to be focused on paying down or off debt, while saving for travel is a top savings category across all 4 generations. Significantly more boomers seem to be focused on that goal compared to the other 3 savings categories. When looking at millennials, they're more likely than their older counterparts to be focused on building their emergency fund, with Gen Z following closely behind them. And Gen X is the most likely to be focused on building their nest egg for retirement. It's also interesting to note that boomers are prioritizing retirement savings to the same degree as millennials. When looking at the proportion of income being saved, majority of Americans say they're saving 20% or less of their monthly household income, with more than 2 in 5 saving 10% or less, and 3% who are actually saving nothing. Only about 1 in 4 Americans are saving more than 20% of their monthly household income. And when we slice that data by generation, when looking at savings as a percentage of income, boomers and Gen X are the least likely to say they're saving more than 20% of their income, while Gen Z is the generation with the highest propensity to save more than 20% of their income. I wonder if that's because perhaps they make less and are saving 20% or more. It's proportionally less impactful overall to their money management, or because they feel they have the most catching up to do. I can't speculate, but I think it's interesting to note where there's opportunity for financial institutions to address savings by generation. Let's also talk about the influence of household income. Having savings goals in general appears to be impacted by household income, as Americans with an annual household income of 75K or greater are more likely to say they're saving for something this year compared to those with an annual household income of less than 75K. And it looks like savings categories are also impacted by income, with likely more discretionary income. Americans with a household income of 75K or more are also more likely to say they're saving for travel and retirement compared to those with a household income of less than 75K.
So that some of those surprise me and some of them don't. They feel like they're, right along with the household income levels, and ages, generations. But I'm curious, Mallory, with your experience in PR across many fintech organizations and banks and credit unions, what do you feel like this indicates?
Yeah, totally. So I think overall, it means that Americans really understand the importance of saving, even when it is a challenge and there's uncertainties in the economy. Um, but when people are in a position to have to decide what to pay for while also determining like how much they can reasonably stash away, that's really where having a relationship with a bank or a credit union can be a saving grace, pun intended there. Um, but they also, consumers need to understand the vehicles or the products used for savings. The vast majority of Americans, 90%, are stashing money away for something this year, according to Plinqit's State of Savings report. And at a time when competition for deposits is fierce, this is positive news for financial institution leaders that consumers do want to save. And in a survey of banking leaders by Bank Administration Institute, deposit growth was cited as their number one challenge for 2024. So overall, I would say this is good news for everybody that, Americans want to save. But at the same time, saving isn't the only determining factor when it comes to financial wellness for consumers. And nor is it the only factor that dictates an institution's deposit growth trajectory. Consumers really do need to be informed and literate when it comes to their personal financial management, especially in today's high rate environment. Um, we got to keep in mind that many Americans might be managing their money in a high rate economy for the first time ever. And this has serious implications for their financial decisions, especially when it comes to, managing their debt and like the savings tactics that they're using. Because, as a refresher, for nearly 15 years, the industry saw near zero interest rates, essentially until March 2022. And since then, there have been 11 interest rate hikes. And the current federal funds rate is now 5.25% to 5.5%. So, in this economy, savings can essentially multiply quickly, but at the same time, debt balances can balloon as well. And they have. Household debt has reached a new high of more than 17 trillion. I think the last quarter it was like 17.8 trillion is what it has surged to. So not only is it good news that Americans obviously want to save, as our survey report shows, they're also focused on saving to pay off debt. According to Plinkett's State of Savings report this year, 41% of Americans are prioritizing saving to pay down debt. And for consumers that need support with debt management, financial literacy and educational resources can really be a powerful tool. And financial institutions are perfectly suited to offer those resources for their communities. And there's good reason to. Why? Because people who understand finance are typically better at managing debt, saving for emergencies, and just investing in their futures overall. And financially literate individuals are also less likely to fall victim to scams and predatory lending tactics because they can make informed decisions that contribute to their long-term financial well-being. And that ultimately reduces burden on social safety nets and just overall creates a much more resilient economy. So it's good news that a lot of people are focused on paying down their debt, but our State of Savings report also showed that Americans may need education on the best ways to build and grow their savings as well. When inflation is stubborn and the prices of everyday necessities are remaining elevated, making one's money stretch further can really be a game changer. And this is just another area where financial institutions are really perfectly suited to help. Because, our report showed that nearly all Americans, 96%, say they're saving money, but nearly half of Americans, at 48%, are actually saving their money in a checking account. And 46% use a traditional savings account. But at the same time, the top high yield savings accounts offer an APY of 5% or greater. And that is 10 times higher than the average rate of a traditional saving or checking account. And that's according to FDIC data. Most traditional checking accounts earn less than 0.01% APY. And so this shows that this is an area where financial institutions can help educate customers on ways to save smarter, not harder. Because oftentimes saving in itself is already hard enough. A few other things, because educating customers on the right savings vehicles really does benefit everybody. And ultimately, financial literacy education, it just leads to better money management practices among account holders. So according to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, they did a survey in 2023, and they found that individuals who received financial education, they're 45% more likely to budget effectively, and then 35% more likely to save for emergencies. That improved financial health translates to lower default rates, more stable banking relationships, and customers who are confident in their financial decisions are more likely to remain loyal to their banks. There was a study published in the Journal of Financial Services Research from 2022 that showed customers with higher financial literacy levels are 30% more likely to utilize additional banking products, such as retirement accounts and investment services. So that increased engagement not only boosts profitability, but it also enhances customer retention at the end of the day. So this is seriously a win-win for everybody. It's how financial institutions can help their account holders thrive financially and generate and keep deposits. And that positions institutions to keep serving the needs of their communities long term and across generations, which is going to bring us to our next point.
So, Christina, can you go into the generational differences across these savings methods?
Yeah. So when we go deeper into the data, we find that generations vary a lot in terms of their preferred savings methods. Boomers are most likely to take the traditional route and use traditional savings accounts or traditional investment accounts. And then similarly, they're also the generational cohort to most likely use CDs as a savings vehicle. But conversely, Gen Z and millennials are more likely than their older counterparts to say they are using crypto to save. The data also shows that cash is still king for some younger Americans, with 27% of Gen Z and 24% of millennials saying they save their money in cash form at home, compared to just 15% of Gen X and 13% of boomers.
So, were there any differences between like those traditional savings methods and high yield vehicles?
Yeah. So while about half of Americans are using a checking or a savings account to save their money, only 1 in 5 or 20% are using a high yield savings account. However, the data shows that high yield savings accounts could gain traction, as more than half of Americans who don't currently save with one of those say that they're likely to open one in the future. Furthermore, millennials and those with higher annual household incomes are more likely to show interest in high yield savings accounts. Among those who don't currently have that type of savings account, millennials are the most likely to say they would be very likely to open one in the future. And then those with annual household income of 50K or greater are more likely than their lower household income counterparts to say they're likely to open one in the future.
Yeah, so some of that, again, some of it surprises me, some of it doesn't. Mallory, I'm wondering, like, what should a bank or credit union exec be asking themselves about their account holders, about their members in light of all this data?
Yeah, totally. I think for one thing, it means overall there's a ton of opportunity out there. Banks and credit unions that are really wondering if they should explore offering a vehicle like a high yield savings account. The consumer data is painting a picture of yes, that it would be welcome. And by the generations most financial institutions are targeting for acquisition, there's a lot of interest from younger generations for these kinds of savings vehicles. And our data also shows that ROI and interest rates are driving decision factors for consumers when they're choosing a savings vehicle. And having that offering and then being able to build strong relationships that support the institution's bottom line. This kind of allows you to meet savers where you are or where they are, but also like in a way that's going to, support your institution long term. Um, Another thing too is, consumers today are seeking personal finance tips from multiple sources. I mean, I've seen stuff on TikTok lately, and consumers do gravitate towards resources and advice that resonates with their stage in life and, the financial goals that they're prioritizing in that moment. And they're interested in these practical tips for budgeting and managing debt and saving smarter, not harder. And with the right savings vehicles and the right educational resources and tools, that's exactly what banks and credit unions can help with. So I think there's definitely a reason to be optimistic about future generations and their savings goals.
I love it. Christina, can I pass it back to you to kind of summarize, like, what are the key takeaways for the people on this call?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one would definitely be that savings is remaining a priority for Americans. Though reasons for savings have shifted and vary by generation, I think it's important to note that bankers should be agile to help their customers best meet their goals. According to the Plinqit Savings Report, the most common considerations for savings vehicles are ROI and high interest rates, but it appears that customers could use guidance on the most optimal savings vehicles, with only 20% actually utilizing high yield savings accounts. I think that means there's a clear opportunity for bankers to educate their customers to drive more usage of this savings vehicle. When looking at generations, many younger Americans are saving with liquid cash at home, which means they could be missing out on high yield savings accounts altogether. And I think making high yield savings accounts easier for a customer to understand could drive more usage of this product, as that's another common consideration for which savings vehicles to use. And once informed what a high yield savings account is, more than half of Americans that don't currently use one would be likely to open one in the future, which basically means that financial education can sway customers to make better savings choices and increase deposits.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that summary. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Mallory. I'm wondering if there are any questions that we can answer. I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A, but let me know if you do have a question. I will say, so I was thinking about what are common things that I hear in my role. So one is, I just made some notes for myself. So I'm thinking about, like, as credit union leaders, as bankers, as you're going into budgeting season. So you might be thinking, okay, so now where do I apply like my marketing dollars in light of this? And to that, I would say it depends on your objectives, right? But in broad strokes, if you're trying to attract younger consumers, you could focus on the search terms that reflect the savings that they say are important, like purchasing a vehicle, purchasing a home, but also I was surprised how many people have cash at home as a savings vehicle, like under a mattress, like getting that into a secure secure account, like a high yield savings account or any kind of account that's held with you as an institution. Oh yeah, here is one question from Kimberly. Kimberly, you said you find the crypto and cash dichotomy in Gen Z fascinating. I do too. Can you dig in on this? So actually, I don't know, Christina or Mallory, which of you feels like better equipped to dig into this? Because crypto, I get, feels, I don't know, of the moment. And probably to a younger generation feels like I can make higher returns faster. But I listen to NPR and some of the stuff I hear, I'm like, I caution my own children who are in that generation, like, this is not a savings vehicle. An FDIC or NCUA insured account is a great vehicle. So, Mallory, do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how much of that is like FOMO a little bit, fear of missing out, and they want to, make sure they're doing everything they can to maybe yield some returns. But I think that presents another opportunity. I mean, high yield savings is quite literally like much more secure. It's insured. The yields are great and it's way less risky than, some of the crypto business that, might be out there. But it's interesting. I think some of that might be a little bit of FOMO, but then it's like the cash thing. It's like, okay, you're still doing that. It's almost like they have, one foot in this door, one foot in that door. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to how it shakes out. And, maybe as they build up, things like retirement savings, like where their, savings are diversified over time. So that'll be something interesting to watch, I would say.
It's interesting to think about what people think liquid capital is.
Mm-hmm.
So, Christina, did you have any thoughts? Did you want to add to that, or you probably can't speculate very much in your role?
No, I definitely agree with both of the points you guys have brought up. I just think it's probably, a good conversation starter when you're talking to Gen Z and millennial customers to kind of see exactly where they're at, because they tend to fall into those two categories more so than their older counterparts, to kind of see, what they could be doing with that money.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Thank you. I wish the marketing person had said that, but glad it was said. So I had another thought that I would, if I were an executive at a financial institution, I would be wondering this. So, Christina, this is for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like household income or age/generation is more influential on what a person is saving for?
Yeah, so we did see differences across both of those different demographics, but I think generation, we definitely saw more stark differences in the savings categories. I think especially as it relates to the debt payoff, retirement, and home purchasing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't see any other questions. I'm going to give another, few seconds if anybody wants to type in a question. Let us know. All righty, that looks like it. You can always reach out to the team if you have further questions. And, if you're interested in any of the data in this webinar, you can find us at the website or the email that's on your screen. Thank you so much for joining us for the release of the Plinqit 2024 State of Savings Report commissioned by the Harris Poll. Thanks to Christina Lojek of the Harris Poll for providing context, and for Mallory Griffin from York Public Relations for context and actionable insights. This is the end of the webinar. Thank you for attending. Have a productive rest of your week.